Today, China has dropped all pretenses and publicly declared that regarding Russia's war against Ukraine, it is fully on Russia's side. Moreover, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the European Union's chief diplomat that Beijing will never accept Russia's defeat in the war against Ukraine. Because in his opinion, this would allow the United States of America to fully shift its attention to China. And accordingly, this contradicts Beijing's public position of supposed neutrality in this conflict. Essentially, China is now openly declaring its support for Russia in this war in every possible way, in order for this war to last as long as possible and for Russia, at the very least, not to lose. And all of this is so that the United States of America and the West as a whole remain tied up in this war, instead of shifting their attention to confronting China. Moreover, many analysts now claim that if China does decide to attack Taiwan, Xi Jinping has already asked the Russian dictator Putin to launch an attack on the countries of Eastern Europe, so that NATO would be tied down in this part of the world and definitely wouldn't be able to send forces to take Taiwan back from China. And in addition to that, today the magazine provides some interesting information regarding Shahed drones. Because now, not only Russia and Iran are involved in their production, but essentially a whole coalition of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. The production of these drones shows that the United States cannot isolate itself from this issue. That this coalition, this axis of evil, has finally united in a hybrid way, often to oppose the West. My name is Alexei Pecci. Today is July 6th. Let's discuss this topic, going through everything step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel. It's called, the link to it is in the description of this video, and there we publish breaking news as it comes in. So the news that just blew up the diplomatic world, because China has basically admitted that they will do everything they can to help Russia in the war against Ukraine, so that this war lasts as long as possible and so that Russia does not lose. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the European Union's top diplomat that Beijing cannot accept Russia's defeat in the war against Ukraine, because this could allow the United States of America to fully shift its attention to China. And, as you understand, this contradicts Beijing's public position of supposed neutrality in this conflict. Well, that's what European officials are saying. Such an admission by the Chinese foreign minister was made during a 4-hour meeting with the head of the European Union's Foreign Policy Department, Kaja Kallas, last Wednesday in Brussels. At this meeting, there was a tough but respectful exchange of views covering a wide range of issues, from cybersecurity and rare earth metals to trade imbalances, Taiwan and the Middle East. And now an unnamed official states that Wang Yi's personal remarks suggest that Beijing may prefer a prolonged war between Russia and Ukraine, which would prevent the United States of America from focusing on its rivalry with China. These remarks echo the concerns of critics of China's policy, who believe that Beijing has far greater geopolitical stakes in Russia's war against Ukraine than its declared position of supposed neutrality suggests. And so, on Friday, at another briefing by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, spokesperson Mao Ning was asked a question about the exchange of views that was first reported by the newspaper. And she confirmed Beijing's long-standing position regarding Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. Next, I will quote Mao Ning. China is not a party to the Ukrainian conflict. China's position on the Ukrainian crisis is objective and consistent. That means negotiations, a ceasefire, and peace. The prolonged Ukrainian crisis serves no one's interests. And furthermore, she added that China wants to achieve a political settlement as soon as possible. Together with the international community, and in light of the will of the interested parties, we will continue to play a constructive role in achieving this goal. But China's public statements about Russia's war against Ukraine conceal a more complicated picture. I'll just remind you that just a few weeks before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese leader Xi Jinping announced a partnership with Moscow, as they called it, without limits. And since then, political and economic ties between the two countries have strengthened. China has positioned itself as a possible peacemaker, but the stakes are high for Beijing here. This is in large part because of the potential loss of an important partner in the form of Russia. China also rejects growing accusations of providing, as they say, almost military support to Russia. Ukraine has imposed sanctions against several Chinese companies for supplying the Russians with components and technologies for drones and components for missile production. We'll discuss drones with you later. And after the record attack on the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Friday and over the past weekend in general, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiga, published photos that, according to him, are fragments of the Shahed combat drone, but the Russians call it Geran 2. And in one of the images, a part of the fuselage of this drone was shown, where it is clearly visible that this device was manufactured in China on June 20th, which confirms that China supplies components for drone production. Sybiha added that on that night, quote, "The building of the Chinese Consulate General in Odessa sustained minor damage as a result of Russian strikes on the city. There is no better metaphor for how Putin continues to escalate his war and terror, involving others in it, including North Korean troops, Iranian weapons, and some Chinese manufacturers. Security in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific region is inextricably and technologically linked. Let me also remind you that this year there have been allegations that Chinese citizens have already fought on Russia's side against Ukraine. That means even human resources are already involved. And Beijing, of course, denies any involvement and repeats previous calls for Chinese citizens to refrain from participating in military actions on either side. But in fact, China, through Foreign Minister Wang Yi, tells Europeans that they will continue to support Russia in a hybrid way so that this war lasts as long as possible. Because the longer Russia wages war against Ukraine, the more the West, and primarily the United States of America, becomes involved in this war. And the less likely it is that Washington will enter into any open confrontation with China. Like, while all resources are concentrated on this war, China can strengthen its economy and possibly even plan an attack on Taiwan. And just recently, the North Atlantic Alliance stated that if China decides to attack Taiwan, it is quite possible that it will turn to the Kremlin with a request to start attacks on NATO countries, particularly on the eastern flank of the alliance. And in order to once again tie up NATO forces in this region, so that the United States of America cannot count on the help of these forces in the war for Taiwan. But here is an interesting point about how China is involved in the war, seemingly at a rather low level, but it reveals the entire global scale. Today, the publication writes that the Shahed 136 strike drone, renamed Geran by Russia, which was originally developed in Iran, is now equipped with components from China and assembled in Russia using North Korean labor. And supposedly it sounds just as ominous as it actually looks. It is reported that the international cooperation underlying this drone symbolizes the formation of a new axis of evil, united by a common hostility toward the West. Especially since recently, the Chinese foreign minister told the European Union's top diplomat that Beijing is interested in prolonging the war in Ukraine so that the United States cannot fully focus on China. And now the media reports that this statement coincides with the fact that the Shahed's four-cylinder engine is produced by a Chinese company, and its transmitters, signal generators, and converters are produced by the Beijing Institute of Microelectronic Technology. So, in fact, the situation is as follows. Iran originally supplied the drone, China now supplies the components, Russia assembles it, and the labor force comes from North Korea. In the example of a single drone, we see the unification of the axis of evil. And what is commonly known about Russia's use? Shaheds are slow but extremely destructive drones that have played an important role in intensifying Russian attacks. And on Friday, just a few hours after a phone call between the presidents of the United States and Russia, the Kremlin carried out the largest single strike on Ukraine since the start of the full-scale war, using drones and missiles. Last summer, Russia launched an average of 350 Shaheds per month, but last month there were 5,438 launches recorded. And now, the coalition formed by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea out of calculation dispels the idea that the United States can simply switch its focus from Ukraine to Taiwan. Or, for example, what the Chinese foreign minister is talking about, and by the way, what they are saying in the Pentagon as well. For instance, let's just leave Ukraine to Putin, let them keep fighting on their own, and we'll fully switch to confronting China. No, these situations are inextricably linked. That's why Washington should take into account the connections between the military-industrial complexes of its adversaries and remember that in 21st century warfare, almost nothing happens in isolation. You shouldn't think that you can just leave Ukraine, switch to China, and that's it. These are two different episodes. No, it's absolutely interconnected. And the statement by the Chinese foreign minister is proof that China is interested in continuing the war because they are thinking about how they will fight against Taiwan. So I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.